Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. College football playoffs quickly approaching. Want to take a deep dive into this Texas-Washington matchup and specifically take a look at Washington and take a look at some key matchups and some keys to the game for the Washington Huskies to take down the Texas Longhorns. We just ran this one for Texas. So if you're a Washington fan, maybe you watch this one. You don't watch the Texas one. Maybe you go and take a look at what Texas is trying to do to beat the Washington Huskies. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. There has been just a ton of support for all of these game breakdowns. We've had a blast doing them. We've had a blast talking ball with you guys in the comment section. Can't thank you guys enough for supporting the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. What do the Washington Huskies need to get done to beat the Texas Longhorns? Dill, going to kick this one off to you. Texas, Washington. What favors Washington in this matchup?
I think, frankly, the surrounding narrative to this game is people saying that Washington hasn't seen a defensive line like Texas. Like, that's all I keep hearing. Every talk show, everyone, that's all anyone says. I don't think Texas has seen a passing attack that's even in the world of the Washington Huskies. And you've looked, Texas has given up some yards in the air to like teams like Houston that, again, not really near Washington. So to me, if Washington can have all those three guys back healthy, which they do, and run that Death Star offense that they've had at times when those three guys are running, I think they can really put up some points on Texas.
By far the biggest mismatch. And you'll hear from the national media, right? Like Texas is going to try to win this game along the line of scrimmage. Washington is going to win this game at the boundary. Those are where the matchups favor each team. No doubt in my mind. Now, you look at Washington and these wide receivers, this is what I think gets left out of the conversation that not enough people are recognizing. That Washington offense took a little dive in terms of how prolific that offense was in the late October months and November. People don't recognize that that team was banged up in a major way. You give a whole month for this Washington team to get healthy. You're going to see all three of the wide receivers healthy, Dylan Johnson, Michael Penix healthy. This is going to be a different offense. This is going to go back to the early September months where you saw this team healthy and looked like it was unstoppable. And the reason I'm citing that is when Washington is at their best, it's a balanced attack, right? You can't cover Polk, McMillan, Roma Duzne. There's too many weapons. So having this Washington team 100% back healthy after a month of not playing a game, I think that's going to be a massive story because it puts a lot of pressure on opposing defenses when you're dealing with three NFL wide receivers, one of which I think should be a top 15 pick and one of the best quarterbacks in the country.
I 100% agree because you just look at what they look like when they have all three of them. They all three do everything well. Like they all three can take the top off. They all three can run with the ball in their hands. They all three run really great routes. So it just opens up such a plethora of plays. You got to defend every blade of grass. And you're looking at a very, very young Texas secondary, talented, but young, and you got to force them to make plays with the ball in the air. You got to force them to cover really good routes. You got to force them to cover, I think, a complex passing attack that you can run when you have this many talented guys. And I don't want to leave out the tight end play too, because frankly, Washington's used their tight ends really, really well as well.
I wrote down two things that you just said. One, ball in the air. That was something that you go back to the Oklahoma State game. Texas didn't struggle with much. We're a little grabby. Did really struggle at times to play that football in the air. Washington, Roma Duzne, probably the best in the game at addressing the football in the air. That's going to be something. Like, even if Roma Duzne, who can create separation, doesn't, Michael Penix is still going to give him a shot. Can the Texas defenders make plays on that football? That's a question. Two, Texas is young in the back end. I mean, guys like Malik Muhammad, Derek Williams, true freshmen out there. This is a complex scheme. Like, they're going to run some rub routes. They're going to do a lot of different things to kind of find some busts in coverage. Can Washington find some of those? Or can Texas in the back end hold up? If you're Washington, you're trying to attack a secondary that's good, but where you have the advantage, especially with some of the experience that you have versus that Texas inexperience. Still, the other thing I'm thinking about, and you're trying to kind of counteract what Texas is going to try to do. And Texas is going to try to just outwin on the inside of that defensive line, right? Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Barron Sorrell, Alfred Collins. It is an elite Texas defensive line. What's one way you can mitigate that? Use some tempo. Get these guys playing a lot of snaps. Try to kind of grind them down. If Washington can use some tempo, turn this into a little bit of a track meet, I think that favors the Washington Huskies here.
If they can get a lot of first downs, and I agree, because you look, they're huge up front. That's really what they make their bones. And their big impact guys are giant. They're all 300 plus pounds. Tavondre Sweat, he's got to be close to 360, 370. Just really, really big. They're the difference makers too. I think the defensive ends are good. I think the offensive tackles for Washington match up fine with them. I don't see a world where they just get pushed around and bullied, because those two, Fatano and Rosenberg, really, really, really good. I think to me, it's like, yeah, if you can just gas those inside guys, gas them out early, that gives you a really good chance. Because again, Washington is like smaller up front, especially in that interior, but they're athletic. I think they can do some things. I think maybe they can get Michael Penix moving a little bit as well. I think there's a lot they can do, but I think it starts and stops with what you said, getting first downs and running really quick.
Getting the ball out quick too. Like, I think Michael Penix takes the second least amount of sacks in all of the country. Yes, the offensive line, Joe Moore Award winners, shout out the boys. But more importantly, not more importantly, but just as important maybe, Michael Penix is an elite distributor. Like, he's getting the ball out extremely quick. Can you make sure you do that against the Texas defensive line that will manufacture some pressures? And I think it comes down to, you look at these two teams, like they have kind of different identities. And Texas is going to want to kind of slow this game down, control the time of possession, keep Michael Penix on the bench. In Washington, you want this to be a track meet, because at the end of the day, when this Washington offense is at its peak, like, there's not a team that can outscore in a shootout this Washington offense. So you're trying to use tempo. You want as many possessions and touchdowns being scored. That's how you want this game to go. Now, flipping sides here, I think the number one story of this game, and if you look at the box score at the end of that game and look at just Texas and what they did in the red zone, that will tell you how this game went. Texas has been brutal and for whatever reason, because I don't know why they struggle, but they do, right? 97% scoring, 91st, in red zone scoring, and even worse, in touchdown scoring. This Texas team is not going to win against the Washington Huskies scoring 3 points in the red zone. If you're Washington on defense, you're repping red zone defense, and come January 1st, you want to make sure when Texas is going to move the ball. This is a good offense. You want to make sure they're only scoring 3 points against this Washington defense.
You know what I think a lot of I think why that is so favorable for Washington is Jabbar Muhammad. And I think this secondary as a whole has certainly gotten better. But you look at what Jabbar Muhammad's been able to do, just following around number ones, preventing those big explosive plays. That's so much helped Washington, because last year, like a year ago, they just couldn't stop. Like, they couldn't stop anything. They were giving up a zillion big plays. It just wasn't a Washington secondary. And when you get that real alpha dog number one corner who's just going to walk around and follow Xavier Worthy all game, I think if he has a giant game and he can really control Xavier Worthy, I think they have a pretty decent chance of stopping those big plays. And then you force Texas to do what they don't want to do, and that's score in the red zone.
That's true. Like, Texas wants to score. They want to hit those 30, 40-plus yard plays for touchdowns. If you can limit that, make them get in the red zone and force them to kind of punch it in from that inside the 20, inside the 10, that's you're right. Texas doesn't want to do that. They want to score with the explosive plays. Last thing I want to note here, and this has been a weird conversation to have with Washington, because they're not necessarily stuffing the stat sheet with sacks, but you look at the back at the film and you look at some of the numbers. This is a very disruptive defensive line. And so when you look at this matchup, Texas has a very good offensive line. They do a very good job keeping Quinn Ewers upright. I'm not necessarily looking for sacks for Washington. I'm not going to look at the box score and say, oh, they only had 1 sack in the game. That was a bad performance. I'm looking at, can you be disruptive to Quinn Ewers? Because when Quinn's on, he's kept clean. When Quinn is struggling, he's under pressure. You take a look at the numbers. When he's kept clean, 76% completion percentage under pressure, that number dips to 50. So I'm not necessarily looking for sacks as much as, can you disrupt that pocket, force Quinn to use his legs, that's definitely a weakness in his game. Braylon Trice, 49 quarterback pressures, gonna need a big game from him.
And that's been another thing when we talk about this Washington defense kind of making a huge turnaround from what they were a year ago. I think not only Braylon Trice, he was great last year. I don't want to say
he's been awesome this year too.
The way this interior defensive line has turned around, Ulu and Tuli are playing such good football. I think they're doing a much better job of pushing these pockets in and making Braylon Trice's game look more disruptive? Because you kind of think to last year, they were doing a lot of like kind of playing chest to chest with guys right at the line of scrimmage, and the pockets weren't moving. Guys were able to escape. They were able to scramble, and they hurt Washington a lot doing that. Now you look, those two have taken their game way up to a new level, and they are being disruptive. And I think you're right. When Quinn Ewers is under pressure, not only is he not great making the completions, but he also is liable to turn the ball over, because that's something he struggled with at times. And you can't give the ball to Washington in this football game because their offense is too good.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like the interior of that defensive line has been, and it goes back to the national media, like ESPN, they'll break this down and say, yeah, Washington's pass rush hasn't been great because they look at the sack numbers. Well, you go back and watch the games and you go back and look at some of those numbers. This has been a Washington defensive line that's been disrupted, not necessarily stuff in the stat sheet with sacks, but they've been disruptive, specifically on that inside as well. If they can do that, and that's how you get Quinn Ewers off his game. When he has a good pocket, like he's got all the arm talent in the world, Coach Sark is dialing up plays. These wide receivers are getting open. If you can break down those pockets, get Quinn Ewers a little uncomfortable. It doesn't necessarily need to come in the form of sacks, but those quarterback pressures, like that's what you're looking for if you're Washington. And at the end of the day, it comes down to how is this game going to get played? If you're Texas, you know what Texas wants to do. They want to control the time possession. If you're Washington, you want to win this game with your offense. And that's not to say that this Washington defense isn't good, because it's been very good, but you want this game to be a track meet. You want to put up points. You want to lean on your best players, Michael Penix, Roman Dusnay, Dylan Johnson, Polk, McMillan. That's how you win this football game. So you look at this, in my mind, like you can kind of tell who's going to win this football game based how it's going to be played. Are there a lot of possessions and a lot of touchdowns? That favors Washington. If it's not, and kind of more of that physical game, probably favors Texas. So if you're Washington, make it a track meet. Lean on your Heisman caliber quarterback in Michael Penix. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.